Hey everybody, welcome back to the SuperBake podcast. I'm your host, Baker. Let's talk about stuff. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. So, I took a little bit of a hiatus from last week, took the week off, but getting back into the swing of things here. So, thought I'd kick off this episode with my review of the new Top Gun Maverick film that just came out. So, of course, as usual, I'm going to be going into the plot in pretty heavy detail. So, just going to go ahead and say right off the bat, spoiler alert for this movie. But just to give, my thoughts briefly on what I thought of this film, I loved it. This movie was awesome. It was everything that I had hoped it would be. And I recommend going to see it for sure. And I'll kind of get into the reasons why here shortly. For those of you that may not have seen the first movie or don't know what it's about, this movie is basically, it's a direct sequel to the first movie, even though it does take place like 36 years later. But it is a direct sequel to the original Top Gun film, with the same character Maverick, played once again by Tom Cruise. In this movie, he is joined with Jennifer Connelly, John Hamm from Mad Men, as well as Miles Teller from the Fantastic Four remake, who plays the character Rooster, the son of the character Goose from the original Top Gun who died in the first movie. And basically the movie is about an aging Maverick who essentially he's like a test pilot testing like new experimental jets for the government. He's called back to Top Gun to train some young pilots for basically what's kind of considered like a suicide mission, teaching them how to fly these crazy like low level terrains, like below the hard deck, I think is what they call it. And one of the pilots that he's training is Rooster, who has a pretty big grudge against Maverick, which they explain the reason why later in the movie, besides just the fact of the history between, Maverick and his father, Goose. There's also some other tension between those two characters, which I'll kind of get into a little bit later in the review. And so, that's a big element of the movie is Maverick basically trying to rekindle his relationship with Rooster while also trying to salvage this mission, as well as kind of trying to prove that he is still a relevant pilot in this day and age. So overall, like I said before, this movie was really good. And at the time of this review, it looks like it's grossed $336.2 million in the box office, and the budget was $170 million, which it's kind of surprising considering how practical this movie is, like the practical effects they use. Like, it's kind of surprised the budget was that small. So I'm going to be praising this movie quite a bit. There's a few nitpicks I have on it. It's definitely not a perfect movie by any means. It is a sequel to Top Gun, for better or worse. Take that as you will. So one of the things that I kind of wanted to note about this movie, which this isn't really a surprise to anyone listening, but one of the things that Tom Cruise and the filmmakers wanted to do was to make it as authentic as they could. So a good portion of what you see on camera really happened, mainly like when you see the images of them, like the footage of them like in the cockpit flying around, that was real. They really had the characters in jets with pilots obviously controlling the aircraft, but yeah, like all that footage of the actors in the cockpits where you see there's one in the trailer where it shows Maverick and his jet as it takes off from the aircraft carrier. That was all real. From what I understand, like the CGI in this movie was used pretty sparingly. I think only for like the dogfights that take place, or dogfight. I think there's really only one real dogfight in this film. And obviously you see them do some aerial stunts in that where it's like, yeah, they probably couldn't have done that with using practical effects and real Navy pilots. So yeah, that obviously obviously CGI was used in this movie, but I think it was used pretty sparingly. And from what I can tell, it definitely seems like for the most part, the vast majority of this movie is real. Because I remember in an interview, Tom Cruise had said that when you get real footage like this, it just gives the moviegoers a different kind of experience, like something that CGI could never do. And I would say I agree with that quite a bit. That's one of the things that I really like about movies that try to stick to practical effects as much as possible. There's just something about practical effects that just make the movie so much better to me. Like even if we're talking about like kind of outdated effects, like from the movie The Thing, like when they did the remake with the CGI, it just didn't look the same, and it didn't have the same kind of horror elements that the original did. So I'm glad that they tried to use as many practical effects in this movie as they possibly could, and I think it definitely shows. I'm just going to get into just kind of a few things about the movie that stood out to me. Number one is the acting. And of course, going to start with the star of the movie, Tom Cruise as the title character. Yeah, I mean, I've got my issues with Tom Cruise as a person. He seems kind of weird, but as an actor, I mean, I definitely think he's probably one of the best in Hollywood right now. At the very least, he's one of the most dedicated for sure. I know he does a lot of his own stunts. I know like he had that infamous accident filming one of the Mission Impossible films. I don't remember which one, but it was where he basically was jumping across roofs, and I think he like shattered his leg or something doing it, and like basically was out of commission for a couple months because of that. He insists on doing a lot of his own stunts, and I think in the new movie, I think there's a scene where he like jumps off a cliff on a motorcycle or something, and I think they've actually filmed him doing that for real, and like he had a parachute equipped, and it's like the dude's like pushing 60. And he's still doing his own stunts, which it's impressive. I mean, I gotta hand it to the guy. I think he delivers. And in this movie, he delivers pretty much exactly what you want. He doesn't miss a beat as the as the character Maverick. Excuse me. I mean, he feels very much like an older, like rougher version of the character from the 1986 film. This is obviously an older Maverick, but he still carries, the weight of Goose's death on his shoulders. You can tell that he's still haunted by it from losing his friend and, as he states, the only real family that he ever had. But there's, like, he still has, like, that cockiness to him, though, from the original movie. It's like, he's good, he knows he's good, we know he's good. So it's like, I don't know, you kind of can't help but smile when you see that, when you see his character on screen. And, of course, and before I go any further, yes, I have seen the original Top Gun. I actually went and watched the entire movie again on Netflix a couple weeks ago to prepare for this. I'd seen it before a few times, but it's been a little while. But it's been a few years, I think, since I actually sat down and watched it from beginning to end. I like it. It's a cheesy 80s movie for sure, but I mean, I like it fine. But this movie, like I said, it feels like a sequel in many ways. But yeah, like Tom Cruise, I think it shows his dedication to his craft. I remember when I saw this movie in theaters, there was actually a little intro for the movie that Tom Cruise personally does, where he kind of talks about how they spent a lot of time trying to get the best look of this film using like real pilots and real fighter jets to do it. And I think it shows his dedication to it. And they could have easily just gone the cheap route and just used CGI for this. And I'm glad that Tom Cruise and the filmmakers insisted on not doing that. So, but he's really great in this movie. There's a lot of really good heartfelt scenes with him in this movie, particularly between him and Rooster's character. The scenes we get with them are really good. I think he and Miles Teller, they play off each other very well. There's one really big emotional moment in the movie that we get from Tom Cruise, which I'll go into here in a little bit. But yeah, like as an actor, I think he's great, and honestly, I think he's definitely one of the best in Hollywood right now. Jennifer Connelly, who plays, I don't remember her character's name, but she basically plays. My understanding is, in the first movie, Tom Cruise talks about how he got in trouble because he hooks up with the daughter of this admiral in the Navy. And I believe Jennifer Connelly is supposed to be that daughter. Except in this movie, she's like grown up and she has like this bar that she owns, and she kind of gives Tom Cruise shit in the beginning of the movie when he meets up with her again. So I like her character in this movie. I think you could make the argument that the romance between her and Maverick's character is not really necessary, but it feels kind of like a classic 80s romance, kind of like Maverick with the his trainer from the first movie, or the whatever her name was, Kelly McGillis, I think was her name, the actress's name. Like, yeah, the romance in this movie, you could probably remove it and it probably wouldn't really impact the overall story, but I liked it. I think those two worked well together. Actually, in many ways, I kind of like Jennifer Connelly's character in this movie a little bit more than Kelly McGillis's character in the original. Like, it feels like she and Tom Cruise have a little bit more chemistry. It seems like they play off each other better. And I just genuinely like the scenes with her and Maverick. Like, there's this really good scene in the movie where she's kind of teaching him how to sail, and he like, it's kind of funny. Like, he says like he doesn't know anything about, sailing a boat, and she gives him shit about that because he's supposed to be in the Navy, which I wonder if that was supposed to be like a play on the movie A Few Good Men, because in that movie Tom Cruise plays a lawyer who's in the Navy, and he says he doesn't like to sail, that it makes him sick, and Demi Moore's character, gives him shit about that because he's in the Navy. So I wonder if this was supposed to be like a callback to that. It'd be funny if it was. But yeah, she's great. She's got she's got a couple good scenes with her and like her daughter in the movie. And we kind of get like a little funny scene between her and Tom Cruise where, he's trying to sneak out of her room so her daughter doesn't see her. And it's kind of like they almost kind of act like two kids sneaking around their parents. So yeah, it's good. It's a good heartfelt, emotional weight to the movie. And I think it does help to kind of ground Maverick and make him feel a little bit more relatable. But again, like I said, I mean, ultimately, I don't feel like the romance really adds a whole lot to the story, but I still liked it fine. And then, of course, we get to Miles Teller, who plays Rooster. Of course, the son of Goose from the original movie, who, as we all know, tragically dies near the end of the first Top Gun. And so in this movie, like, the relationship between Rooster and Maverick is definitely I would say the focal point of the film. It's revealed in the movie that Maverick, at the request of Rooster's mother, he actually delayed his application or pushed back Rooster's application into the academy, basically like trying to slow down his career as a Navy pilot, because like Rooster's mom asked Maverick to do that because of what happened to Goose, and she didn't want to see her son go through the same thing. Maverick reveals that later in the movie, and that's a pretty heartbreaking scene, where we see like he doesn't want to do this to Rooster, but at the same time he wants to try to protect him. And we kind of see that he's sort of he sort of thinks of himself as sort of a surrogate father in place of Goose, since he's no longer around. The mom, played by, what was her name, Meg Ryan, like, she's not in this movie. It would have been kind of cool if they could have gotten her to return for her character, but yeah, she's not in this film. But still, like, I think all the scenes that we get with Maverick and with Rooster, I think are definitely probably some of the highlights of this film. The only thing I will say is I do feel like there aren't a lot of them. Like, we get a couple one-on-one moments between these two characters and some pretty big heavy moments, especially towards the end of the film. I would say probably the last third of the movie is when we really see the two of them interact together. But like, all in all, like, I was kind of surprised at the small amount of time that these two were together on film. Like I said, there's a couple big scenes between them. Like, there's a scene where, Rooster initially confronts Maverick about why he delayed his application, and we get a little bit of a back and forth between them in that scene. There's a really great scene in the movie where Maverick is basically trying to test the new pilots in Top Gun, where basically he's kind of doing what Tom Skerritt did in the first movie, where he's trying to kind of playing like sort of like a training game with them to see if they can like shoot him down, but not really shoot him down. They're just trying to lock onto him with their weapons, and he just keeps like taking people out one after another, like including Rooster and all the other pilots. And these are all supposed to be like the top pilots in the world. So like, yeah, the scenes between them are really good when we get them. I just feel like there could have been a little bit more between these two characters. I really would have liked to have seen them explore the history, especially just kind of knowing what we know about Maverick and Goose's relationship. It would have been nice if we could have seen like even like a few more like big arguments and confrontations between Maverick and Rooster in this film. And I just kind of feel like we never quite got that. Like, we got hints of it here and there, but I felt like that it was never really brought to the forefront as much as it could have. One thing like that I really wanted to see in this movie was I would have loved to have seen like a moment where maybe like Maverick finally, talks to Rooster about how he feels about the death of Goose and how it's impacted him through all these years and like the effect that it's had on him. And because I feel like we see a little bit of that in the first movie. We obviously can tell that like Maverick's, crushed by Goose's death and that it's haunting him. But it would have been kind of nice if we could have seen a scene where maybe he gets some sort of catharsis talking about that with Goose. We get something similar in this movie, but I just would have liked to have seen maybe a little bit more from these characters. Miles Teller, as far as an actor goes, I think he's fine. I don't really have a problem with him. I never saw the movie Whiplash. I know he got a lot of praise for that movie. The only movie that I've seen him in besides this one was, like I said, the remake of the Fantastic Four. And again, he as Reed Richards, he was fine. I didn't dislike him in that movie. I just thought he was just sort of okay. But I do think he's definitely got talent as an actor. He definitely, number one, he definitely looks like Goose's son in this movie. They did a good job of making him look like someone who would be Goose's son. He even has kind of like the little mustache like what Goose had in the first movie. So that was like a cool little touch that they gave them. Yeah, like they definitely make it believable that he would be the son of that character in this movie. And personality-wise, yeah, I mean, I think he does a good job of making Rooster feel like his own character. He doesn't just feel like a no-name character in this film. It feels like he does seem like he's, distinguishable from the other pilots in this movie. And that's, I think he does a good job in that regard. I don't think he's given a whole lot to do with the script in this film, to be perfectly honest, but I think what he is given, he does a good job with it. Yeah, like I said, I would have liked to have seen more scenes between him and Tom Cruise's character in this film. But again, I think what we got was fine. Just would have been cool to see a little bit more of it. And then there's the big character reveal in this one, and this was something that I was really waiting to see if he was going to be in this movie, and that is Val Kilmer returns as Ice. Or Iceman in this movie. And that was a really cool scene. Of course, like Val Kilmer, he's had, significant health problems the last few years. So I think that was kind of a big debate, was whether or not he was actually going to be in the film. And he is in the movie. He doesn't have a very particularly big role. Mostly we kind of see him behind the scenes. Like he's texting Maverick throughout the movie because he's kind of the guy who's in charge of like I can't remember if he's in charge of Top Gun. He's pretty a high-ranking admiral within the Navy now, and so he's kind of used a lot of his influence to kind of help Maverick, keep his job, as we find out later. And it's cool to see that these two characters, after their aggression towards each other in the first movie, it's cool to see them develop like this kind of almost like brotherly bond with each other, especially now that Maverick doesn't have Goose in his life. And I think the way they reintroduce Val Kilmer into this movie, I think they did it pretty tastefully, taking his condition into account. I think that was a really good emotional moment in this film. And I really liked it too. It's a brief moment, but it's done, I think it's done well. And of course there is a pretty sad moment with his character later in the movie. Not going to reveal too much about that. I'm just going to let you kind of go see the movie for yourself. But it leads to a pretty emotional scene with Tom Cruise's character in the film. And again, I think watching the first movie, I think this will really help you appreciate this movie more. I will say, I think Top Gun Maverick does a good enough job of catching you up if you've never seen the first movie. Like, I think you'll get the gist of what's going on. It's not like the first movie had this big, overly complex story. So... And I kind of feel like most people know the story of Top Gun just through cultural osmosis. Like, even if you've never seen it, chances are you know enough people who have watched it and you've seen enough quotes and clips of it on YouTube that you probably know basically what happens in that movie. So, but yeah, I think the movie, if you haven't seen the first movie, I think you'll understand what's going on fine in this movie, but I also think you'll kind of be missing out a little bit. And I do feel like this movie may not hit quite as hard as it would otherwise. So I do recommend watching the first movie before you see this one, if only because I think you'll get more out of it as a result. But anyways, yeah, Val Kilmer, I think he does a great job in this movie with the scene that he's in, and he, I think this is just a testament to his acting ability. He, despite only being in the film for maybe like 5 minutes tops, he has such a presence to him in the scene. It was really cool seeing him reprise his role in this film. So I love that they did that. I love how they were able to portray it, and I think it was a really awesome touch for the movie for sure. Yeah, and like I said, acting all around this movie really good, really well done. And then of course the music for this movie, that was a really cool thing too. Was the they do the song Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins. They play that in the opening scene. It's just like the opening scene in the first movie when they play Danger Zone, and I'd be lying if I said I'd be lying if I said it didn't bring a smile to my face seeing that again. It was so cool to see. I think, from what I remember, I think Lady Gaga did the soundtrack for this movie. So, in the soundtrack, I would say, other than Danger Zone in the beginning of the movie, the soundtrack for me was kind of in the background. I wouldn't say that it was something that I really kind of went out of my way to notice in the movie, but I mean, I liked it fine. To me, the visual effects in this movie and just the characters themselves were kind of the stars. But, they do play the Top Gun, like, main theme music whenever they're flying. When you get, like, those really cool, majestic flight scenes, you get to hear that a lot in this film, so that was really cool. I mean, yeah, overall, I think the music was really good in this movie. And man, Lady Gaga, she's getting a lot of work right now. Oh, good for her. That's awesome. I'm glad to see that. Of course, special or cinematography. Of course, yeah, like this every shot in this movie is great. I saw this in kind of a smaller theater, so there really wasn't much in the way of surround sound. It was just kind of a small local theater because I like to support them. So most of the sound kind of came from the front. So I would say, if you get the chance, definitely see this in IMAX. I think this would be a movie to see. I think this movie would definitely benefit from being seen like on a bigger screen with like that big, loud surround sound in it. So I would definitely recommend seeing it, in one of your bigger theaters if you can. I just think this is one of those movies that definitely deserves it for sure. But yeah, like the cinematography in this movie, I mean, just the look of this movie, I'm always impressed when they do films like this. I love it when they rely very little on CGI, or as little as possible. Like, all the scenes in this movie look really good and authentic. When they're on the aircraft carriers, that always looks really cool. Again, like I said, when they take off from the aircraft carriers and you get the point of view from the pilots as the jet takes off, and you can kind of see there's a part where when Maverick is taking off from the carrier, you can see like there's a moment where like his character, like as it hits the edge of the ship, you see his head kind of rock forward just from the force of the jet kind of ducking down just a little bit just before it actually like accelerates to take off. And it's like, that's such a cool little detail, because it's like that's something that you probably wouldn't get with CGI. It's something that you're only really going to see with practical effects. So I love that they went that extra mile in this movie, which again is why I'm so surprised that this was only $170 million budget. I can't imagine like using real jets and fighter pilots. That shit's got to be expensive, especially like if the benefit of CGI, of course, is that if you screw up a shot, you can just go back in and reanimate it. With a fucking real jet, it's like if you get a shot that's wrong, you got to circle that jet around and do that again and fill that bastard up with gas. And Lord knows gas ain't cheap right now. But yeah, that was really cool. I love the look of this movie. I don't really have any complaints there, honestly. Just the movie looks really good. They do a good job of making it look modern, but it looks like a Top Gun film. That's the best way I can really put it. As far as like any nitpicks I have for this movie, like I kind of alluded to this before, I wish we could have seen more between Maverick and Rooster. I think we get enough to service the film, but it just would have been nice, given the emotional history between these two characters, it would have been nice if we could have gotten a few more scenes between them, but as it stands, I think they're fine. Another nitpick I do have with this movie is I do feel like there's a few moments in the movie where you really kind of have to suspend your disbelief, and to be fair, I'm going to keep this in mind, you have to do that with the first movie as well. The original Top Gun, there's definitely quite a few scenes in that movie where I'm sure a lot of real fighter pilots were probably watching that and rolling their eyes, like just thinking like, are you kidding me? There's no way you could pull that shit off. Like, of course, the infamous scene in the first movie, the iconic scene where Maverick, flies his jet upside down over an enemy jet and takes a picture of them, and like, or I think Goose does. And it's like, yeah, of course, like in real life, no, excuse me, yeah, that shit would not fly. You'd be potentially causing like an international war doing that. But yeah, you have to do that quite a bit in this movie. Like, there's a scene in the movie where, number one, it's like, how fucking tough is Maverick in this movie? So like, there's a scene in the movie near the very end when they get into a dogfight when they're trying to pull off the operation to take out the enemy base, and Maverick gets shot down by a missile. By an SAM missile, and he survives. He survives the crash because he, ejects out of the jet and survives. And then an enemy helicopter chases Maverick down and tries to take him out, and then Rooster swoops back around in his jet, shoots it down, but then he gets shot down by another SAM missile, and he survives too. And I'm just kind of like, wow, 2 in a row where their jets get hit by a missile and they both are just perfectly fine. It's like, okay. And then of course the two of them, this is the only part of the movie I kind of have a problem with. It's the very last, like, probably 10 minutes of the movie where like Maverick and Rooster are shot down. They're behind enemy lines and they have to sneak onto this enemy base that they just bombed, and they have to take an old enemy jet. And it's like right as they're walking on, you see like there's hundreds of enemy soldiers just walking around, and they walk. It's not even like they're sneaking around. They're just basically walking right out in the open. And I'm just like, okay, nobody sees them and nobody thinks that looks odd. And then they get into this old jet, which just happens to still work, and they take off. And then there's another like really ridiculous scene, like where they're in this old jet that just barely works. It's like the radio doesn't work, nothing, like the radar doesn't work. And like they're getting followed by like these 2 enemy pilots that are in these 2 technologically far superior jets, and they're able to take them out. It's like, yeah, it's an awesome scene. It's badass to see Maverick do what he does best, but it's also like, what? Like that doesn't seem like that would work at all. I feel like they should get shot down immediately. And then of course, like, what was it? The front piece of landing gear on the jet gets taken off. Like when they first take off with the plane out of the enemy base, it like they clip like a tower or something, and like the landing gear comes off. So like they have to land on the aircraft carrier when they finally make it back, and like even though they're missing like the front landing gear, it's like, again, I'm not a fighter pilot, I don't know anything about that, but I'm just kind of like, yeah, you really have to suspend your disbelief in this movie when you're watching it, because otherwise it's just like, it's hard to buy into some of that stuff. And also, of course, too, and this is just kind of like a general thing towards Maverick, not necessarily just this movie, but just Top Gun in general. It's like, how has this guy not been thrown in military prison for just even one of the stunts that he's pulled? Like, you know, he like in the beginning of the movie, we see him when he's the test pilot. He's flying that one experimental jet at like Mach 10, and then he takes it beyond Mach 10 and gets it destroyed. Like he basically crashes it because the force is just too much for it to handle, and he has to like hoof it back to base essentially. It's like, how many tens of or hundreds of millions of dollars did that jet cost the government and taxpayers? And it's like, and he just kind of gets a slap on the wrist. Like I think like the admiral or whoever, played by Ed Harris, is about to like discipline him, but he gets called back to Top Gun. It's like, man, guy costs the government like hundreds of millions of dollars in damages for an experimental jet, and he gets sent back to Top Gun. It's like, it's a pretty sweet deal. But yeah, honestly, beyond those things though, I don't have much else negative to say about this movie. My overall thoughts of Top Gun Maverick, it's a great movie, and I think it definitely deserves to be viewed in theaters. And I'm glad to see that it has made as much money as it has. I think this movie definitely deserves it. It shows that Tom Cruise is, despite getting up there in age, is still at the top of his game and is still a devoted actor who is dedicated to his craft, and I love that. I definitely recommend seeing this in theaters if you get a chance. One thing that I love about this movie, I think more than anything else, is, like I said before, this movie gave me exactly what I wanted. It's a Top Gun movie through and through. It's got that classic 80s cheese action movie, but that's what I wanted from it. It's like a hamburger. It's not a sophisticated, exquisite meal. It's just a hamburger, but it's a delicious fucking hamburger. Like this, it's not trying. Another thing I love about this movie too is it doesn't try to do what a lot of movies I think would do nowadays, where, I feel like a lot of movies, what they would do with a film like this is they would try to replace Maverick with like a younger, quote unquote better pilot. Like some filmmakers, I think what they would try to do is they would try to make it where like Rooster replaces Maverick as like the new, top pilot out of Top Gun. And this movie doesn't do that. This movie is very much about Maverick, hence his name in the title. It's his movie. He is the hero. He's the main character of the story, and that is the focus of the film. And I think that's where it definitely excels. This movie doesn't try to be anything other than what it is, and for that I applaud it. So this movie has high recommendations from me. It was way better than I thought it was going to be. Easily one of my favorite movies that I've seen in a while. Obviously nothing amazing. It's not, This movie's probably not going to win any Oscars or anything like that, but it's just a fun summer blockbuster. So definitely get out and go see it when you get a chance. All right, everybody, I think that's going to conclude this episode. Once again, I am on Spotify, Anchor, and YouTube, and you can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook. I'll catch you all next time. Later.